It's crazy to me to think that we've owned this van now for 2 whole years, and there's just so much that I wish I had known at the beginning that I know now after 2 years of use and traveling across the Western United States with my family. But as the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. And so 2 years later, here are a few things that I would do differently with the build out of our van. We'll focus on the interior build of the van in this video, and in a future video, I'll focus on some of the exterior accessories and what I'd do different 2 years later. And I share this perspective as someone who's traveled in the van with my wife and 2 kids, so we're a family of 4 traveling. And I'll include suggestions as well if you're solo or a couple, and maybe how you'd tweak some of these suggestions to best suit your traveling style. I should also add that this video isn't sponsored. There's no money changing hands for the things I'm about to talk about. This is just kind of a fun side project because when I started building out a van, I desperately looked for information on what kind of build out to do for different situations, and I just found that there wasn't a ton of relevant information out here. So hopefully this video helps you in some way. First, let's talk about that 3-person bench seat and why we decided to keep it in the van. See, it really boils down to 2 main reasons. The first was that, of course, we wanted extra seating for anybody else who wanted to come along.
Look, there's some people want to ride too. Pick them up.
And the second was that we felt like it was the safest option, being Department of Transportation approved and being the stock Mercedes bench seat for the van. When we first started traveling with the van, we had 2 kids that were in like the giant car seats, and now they're both in booster seats. And so a lot of that bench seat really isn't necessary. So I think in hindsight, we would have ditched the 3-person bench seat and gone with one of the 2 passenger bench seats. And the reason that I say that is because when you have that full 3-person bench seat side to side in the van, it takes up a lot of space. The trouble is that the area going from those front 2 captain's chairs to the rear of the van is a really high traffic area. And so sometimes it feels like you're kind of like doing yoga to get around that bench seat and go to and from the front or back. And if you've got a curtain up on that large window on the sliding door, forget about it. You're always bumping into that thing and it's always falling down. And if you're a couple or traveling solo, just ditch that bench seat entirely, and you could put a shower there, you could put a larger kitchen, a sink. You've got all kinds of options if you get rid of that bench seat. I'm a little bit envious, to be totally honest. The second big consideration is how you're going to sleep in the van. And we looked at a handful of different options and ultimately landed on the MOAB Adventure Wagon bed. And if I could go back in time, I think I'd explore other options. The first big issue that I have with the MOAB Adventure Wagon bed is that while it's a 3-panel system, if you truly use all 3 panels based on our configuration, you have very little movement between the back of the 3-person bench seat and the front of the bed. And if you've got all 3 panels on there, you barely have access to the dinette, let alone the ability to use your induction stovetop and the fridge. It just creates for a really, really cramped experience. One solution that we came up with was to use 2 of the 3 panels to give us a little bit more room between the back of the bench seat and the MOAB Adventure Wagon bed. And this opened up 1 seat on each side of the dinette, and you still had to crawl underneath the MOAB bed to get to anything in the back. Definitely not ideal. Our final solution, or at least the one that we've been using all summer, has been to bring 1 of the 3 panels, the one that's all the way in the back, and my oldest daughter sleeps up there almost like a bunk bed. I suppose you could install all 3 panels and bring them along with you and take them out as needed, but then the question becomes, where the heck do you even put these things? I mean, they're huge, they're heavy, they're really not that easy to move in and out of the van, and so you're kind of left with figuring out where to put them. Do you put them on top of the van? Do you put them in front of the van? Do you just leave them outside? They're not inexpensive by any means, so you don't want them to get weathered. And so you're just left with all of these panels trying to figure out what to do. And that's why I say I would have explored other options. See, if I knew then what I know now, I would have figured out a way to use the bench seat as a bed for one of my kids, and then figured out how to use something in between the captain's chairs, one of those inflatable things, to make a bed out of that front section. And then I wouldn't have had to deal with huge rails, huge panels, things blocking the windows that I have in the back. And I think I would have had a ton more room to move around within the van. And I think the travel experience overall would have been much, much better. And again, if you're solo or you're traveling as a couple, you don't have to worry about this. Just get a regular dinette that folds across, possibly something high so you can have a ton of storage underneath. And I think you're set. Again, a little bit envious. Once you've got your seating and bedding arrangement figured out, I think then you can kind of move on to all of the other things on the interior build. The first one is the refrigerator. I think this is a must, especially if you're traveling for longer distances. We went with a 65-liter fridge, and there are many times that I wish we had something bigger. Second is the induction stove top. Now, this is something that I didn't think that we would use initially, but now that I have it, I think it's really, really practical and useful. The third is the Webasto diesel heater. This is something that sits underneath of the passenger chair, and this has been fantastic. We've camped in the van with nights well into the teens, possibly single digits, and the Webasto diesel heater has kept us really warm all night long. The fourth thing is the microwave, and while this is a nice creature comfort, I don't think that it's a necessity, and if you are gonna get one, make sure that you have an electrical system that can handle it. And fifth, we have a set of cabinets that runs along the driver's side of the van. While these may not be a necessity, they are really, really nice for organizing things, so I think they are a worthwhile consideration. And number 6, we have a Lagun Table. This is something that we thought we would use quite often, but we had actually found that it is completely useless and it just gets in the way. It's another one of these things that when you're not using it, you have to figure out where to store it. And when you are using it, at least based on where ours is, it just kind of gets in the way. And number 7, I'll call Thinsulate and the sound dampening. I think this is a must. It insulates the van really well, keeps you nice and warm, and whatever sound dampening they used, well, it makes the ride much, much better. When the van is just stock and it's empty, it sounds like you're driving around in a tin can. As soon as that stuff was added, it sounded really, really nice. Number 8, we have swivel seats, and this is something that we don't currently have, but it is something that I want to get. See, when you have the 2 front seats just facing the front of the van, if you have people behind you, it makes it really difficult to interact. And so I feel like if you could swivel those seats around so that they face the back, you'd have a whole new seating area and it would be a much more enjoyable interaction for those cold nights that you spend in the van. For number 9, I have solar and electrical, and I won't dive into real deep tech specs here, but what I will say is that whatever you think you need, you probably need more, and you probably need a more robust system, especially if you're doing something with a microwave. Number 10 is the Maxxair Vent Fan, which I think is a worthwhile consideration for every single van. And if you've got the space for it, I think you ought to consider 2 so you can get some decent airflow throughout the van. And last, we have the flares from Flarespace, which I'm a really big fan of. They actually open up the van quite a bit, and if you use them properly, you have a lot of extra room side to side. I'll talk more about those in my exterior video. And that's my rapid fire approach to an interior van build. I think you start by figuring out how many seats you're gonna need, and then you move on to a bed configuration. And once you've figured those 2 things out, you build everything else around those. And you try to predict your needs as much as possible, which I know is very difficult to do. So if you have any questions, drop me a comment below or shoot me a message on Instagram. Happy to respond to any specific questions that you might have. In future videos, we're gonna talk about external accessories and things that I think are worthwhile and things that are not, and some things that I would change if I could go back in time. We're gonna go back into cycling, talk more about that. We're gonna talk about some travel and maybe some fun winter stuff. Anyways, until next time.